very glad to be joined here by Priscilla and by Ramon. That was a difficult act to follow, obviously, but I think what we're here to talk about is the role that the private sector and really brands can play. I want to, of course, thank Northwell Health, but also the Ad Council for the work they're doing to promote this incredibly important topic, and I think you're going to hear from them shortly with some very exciting news. But Priscilla, let's start with you. Amalgamated has become known, historically, but also very much under your leadership for advocating and amplifying issues and social justice. And I'm curious how the work that you're doing on gun violence fits into that ethos.
First, I should apologize to the doctors in the room because I have a cough. And if anyone can figure this one out, it's been 3 years. I'd love to get out of it. No, I really, I bet that's true. I bet that's true. I'm sure that's right. I also just want to say how inspiring it is to be in a room that is a cross-section focused on this issue. I love that we're approaching this from a healthcare perspective. This is a hard act to follow. It's 2 hard acts to follow because it is so important. The role that we all play in solving this issue is immense, and it touches every one of us. We all have our personal stories. We all have our business stories. There are intersections. This affects everyone in every way. It's not political, it's not race, it's not economic only, it's all of those. And I think it's incumbent upon us all to do what we can. And that's what we stand for at Amalgamated.
Mm-hmm. Ramon, obviously, we're sitting in this room with, very, very clear branding. For Northwell, and
I'm glad you know.
I had to say it.
I like the orange
The chairs, yes, exactly. No, I'm trying to find my way. And so it's all very coherent, but and clearly you're doing a lot on this. But could you talk a little bit about, in some respects, the work and the messaging that you are putting out there? Because there has been a lot, and there have been campaigns, and so for those of the audience that haven't seen it, can you talk a little bit about the work?
So first of all, welcome everybody. For those who are streaming online, there's 200 people in the room. It's standing room only. There's an overflow room that's full as well, and we have 3,000 people who are dialed in to really this important conversation. And Will, to your question, Northwell is almost 100,000 employees. We have about 7,000 physicians. We live as members of the fabric of the communities that we serve. And as a brand, we have, and I think all brands have this, hard power and soft power. Like, how does your brand choose to show up? And I think it's perfectly fine if your company decides, I'm going to produce the best product I can possibly produce. But what does it mean to the people who live around the manufacturing plant that product is produced? What does it mean for us, for the physicians who live in these communities, the 20,000 nurses who are healthcare heroes every day? So we're blessed to have a platform that's built from a leader who gives us permission to step into a space and have really important social conversations. Like, people show up to our institutions for a whole host of social factors, and then we're there to treat them. So how do we address those upstream issues that are social factors and build a conversation? Now, sometimes these are scary things, right? So getting into a gun violence conversation, historically, that's been a lever to a Second Amendment conversation. And there's over 400 million guns in the country. They're not going anywhere. It's codified in the Constitution. So how do you stay on the right side of this? And this is where healthcare is mobilized through the CEO Council and through our leadership, really to occupy a lane that we have brand permission to participate in. And I think it's a wonderful lesson on how a brand can show up in a meaningful way, use purpose with a capital P and all sorts of hard and soft power, and start to bend the curve on a conversation. Lastly, I was delighted at the last panel because you saw two individuals coming together rationally to talk about a conversation. And I do think we need more of that. I think there's a lot of agreement that guns should not be the leading cause of death for children in this country. That is an absurd place for us as a nation to be in. And so how do other brands choose to participate? But I would encourage all brands to evaluate how do you use that soft power? How do you step forward? How do you use purpose, whether it's a capital P or a small p, to help in a conversation that society needs to have?
Yeah, I'd love to double click on that in a moment, but can you talk about the campaign and because
Sure.
the positioning is really interesting as a health epidemic as opposed to an issue of sort of security or otherwise, right? And I think that was one of the interesting things that I've seen in your work related to this initiative.
Yeah, listen, in 2019, something happened and it's insidious, and you saw a decrease in automobile accidents, the historic cause of death for children in this country, and really across the globe. And you had this crossing of the Rubicon, and guns became the leading cause of death of children. So we really wanted to tap into the rational and the emotional of that fact. That flipping of the switch all of a sudden allowed us to step forward and really aggressively have a conversation with society. So we did a campaign regionally, and I shared it with a number of my chief marketing officer peers across the nation. That campaign was picked up by 157 other health systems and the creative was offered for free to them. They in turn branded it themselves, ran it in their markets. And it started a national dialogue. And we saw the data, which was super encouraging, that once parents knew that there was this hidden danger for their children, you tapped into this natural protective instincts that we all have as parents. That as a society, we have no issue going to our neighbors and saying, hey, Johnny has peanut allergies and Susie can't swim. Please don't have peanuts, and do you have a pool? And now we have to have a conversation about unlock guns in the house.
Right.
So how do we give people the courage to have that conversation? Only 20% of the population knows that statistic. And we have to move that into a different place to really engage the public to do that. And who better than a physician? One of the most trusted individuals in society, a very special relationship where we all fight for our 5 minutes of time with them in their office. How do you tap into that equity and offer that up to a consumer as really a trusted messenger?
That's great. Priscilla, you were in a former life a chief marketing officer before you became a CEO. And I'm curious, as you think about Amalgamated and the brand, how does, again, the gun violence issue and how do you create a brand that can really, step out on this issue as you have in a lot of different other issues?
I've worked in financial services my whole career. And the job right before this one, where I was chief marketing officer at a major bank, it was the Commonwealth Bank of Australia. I was in Sydney, and largest bank in Australia. And a big part of my job there, as in every job I had for 30 years, was corporate public involvement, thinking about the community. In Australia, if you're thinking about the community that is most susceptible or vulnerable, you're thinking about Aboriginals and Torres Strait Islanders. And we had 800 member group just focused on that community and how to really give access to capital, which is essentially, in a nutshell, all we ever do in the financial services arena, is try to think about giving access to capital to communities that change communities. And so there's always been a piece of my job focused on that for these 3 decades. And you learn a lot from the people that you talk to when you're in a marketing role, when you're in a community involvement role. Because at the end of the day, you're trying to understand where the rubber meets the road, where the product is bought or used, what's the experience. And in doing so, I learned the power of financial services. I learned what we have done as an industry that has saved communities. I'm Ethiopian descent, grew up in Germany. I've seen it all over the world, what we have done to really strengthen and bolster communities, and what we have done in financial services that has harmed communities. And so it became incumbent upon me to just sort of think about, in this role, working for America's socially responsible bank, that has the opportunity to really weigh in on some of these issues. It's incumbent upon us to try to correct wrongs. And when we undertook the biggest one related to gun violence, it was a natural outgrowth of all of that.
As the rancor around social issues becomes more evident and frankly amplified in a number of different ways, how do you at Amalgamated react to that and understand the sensitivities of customers, stakeholders, your publicly traded company, and how do you navigate all of that in these pretty choppy waters?
We are a publicly traded company, but we're also a public benefit corp.
Right.
We're a B Corp. We're the largest B Corp in financial services, and so we have an obligation to all stakeholders. To your point, and the way we think about it is, we think about those issues as the good governor just articulated, that touch most Americans. We are not a global bank, and so we think a lot about that which touches most Americans, and most Americans would agree on. And so it doesn't matter which side of the aisle you either sit on or vote for. You care about what's happening every day in your schools and churches and places you go, parks, and you care about the fact that you have to be cognizant of guns. I walk into the airport. I left Chicago last night to come here and walk into the airport, and there's the big sign of, no guns in this facility. And I have to think about what that means. I was in a country for 3 years that didn't have public use of guns, didn't have nearly the guns we have in this country. I think about the difference in how I feel walking down a street on a dark night when I know there's potentially guns and when I didn't know there was potentially guns. I mean, you have to think about all that. So, should I tell you what we've done?
Yeah, exactly, please.
So, whether you're a gun owner or not, you don't want to see illicit guns and you don't want to see them used for illegal purposes. So the bank started thinking about how financial services gets involved here. One of the ways we get involved as an industry is that we're financing illegal behavior. Now, the wisdom led by Republicans, but bipartisan wisdom after 9/11 was to institute the Patriot Act. Patriot Act basically says that financial services firms should assign a merchant category code to every type of retailer. If we do that, that information collected along with other information will help us determine when there's illegal activity happening. And you guys all experience this. When you get your ping on your phone that asks whether or not you used your credit card at a store in China and you're sitting in New York, or it's a baby clothing store and you haven't bought anything in a baby clothing store ever. That happens because of a collection of data that says that particular purchase was unusual for you. Maybe normal for me, but it's unusual for you. One of the pieces of data that's important for us to have to be able to do that is a merchant category code for gun stores. I know this is a little wonky, but bear with me. So we after reverse engineering a number of mass crimes as well as gun violence that was occurring in our cities every day, recognized that when you reverse engineer them, part of the reason they happened, or one of the deterrents to them happening could have been an early detection of criminal behavior using credit cards. So let me just give you an example. A guy's on 95. He stops at 3 different exits. He goes across state lines from Pennsylvania to New Jersey to New York. He stops at a number of exits, gets off, goes to a motel, spends $100. We don't know what he bought, but we have a merchant category code, so we know he bought spent $100 in each of these locations, gets back on, gets off, does it again, gets back on, gets off, does it again. Shortly after that, small amounts of money, all around $200, start to come into his account from people fitting a certain description. He recently bought a bunch of food at McDonald's and Burger King and H&M and other inexpensive places to eat and clothe girls. I'm trying to get you there. What do you think's going on?
Trafficking, yeah.
Human trafficking. If the bank can see that, they can file a suspicious activity report. Because he crossed state lines, that'll go to the FBI as well as the law enforcement agencies in each of those states. Maybe, just maybe, 4 little girls get picked up under the age of 14. That's because there was a collection of data, including the merchant category code. Guess which industry doesn't have a merchant category code? Did somebody say it? 6,000 gun stores in this country. Now, according to the Patriot Act, they should. They have over $10 million in sales. In fact, they have over $10 billion in sales. So they really should, but they don't. So what does that mean? That means that a guy can go into, he can take out 4 credit cards. He can go into a hotel in Las Vegas with over $90,000 worth of guns and ammunition that he purchased in multiple gun stores across multiple state lines. He can go up into that hotel room. He can leave his satchels of guns and ammunition in that hotel room for 2 weeks, waiting for a concert. The concert happens. He takes those guns, he shoots into the concert, and he kills 59 people. It's the largest mass shooting in America. It was in Las Vegas. It happened, we only know about this because it was reverse engineered after the fact. We know about the Pulse nightclub where something similar happened because it was reverse engineered after the fact. He followed a dependable, predictable pattern. It doesn't only happen in mass crimes, although that should be enough for all of us. It also happens in the crimes that occur every day in every major city and smaller towns. It happens when someone goes to Georgia, buys guns because it's cheaper and they can get them easier, truck them up to New York or New Jersey, sell them on the black market to people who are not legally allowed to buy guns in those states, so therefore they're willing to pay more. It's a lucrative business. And then those people use those guns to commit everyday crimes that happen to you and me and our families and our friends every single day. Predictable patterns. We can see them buying the guns in Georgia if they're doing it on a credit card. We can see the money coming into their account in New York, but we need to have this merchant category code.
Yeah.
So the bank filed for it. I'm going to call out a guy. Yeah, stand up. Stand up. Hudson Munoz worked at Amalgamated Bank at the time. He now runs Guns Down America, and he pushed me hard. So we, after 3 years of, this guy can really be annoying. After 3 years, we got it. We got the merchant category code for gun stores. I wish I could say the story ended there. Right now, 17 states have issued laws or bills, introduced bills, prohibiting the use of the merchant category code only for gun stores in their states. New York and California have complied with the act and are actually have laws in their states requiring it. This thing's going to get worked out over time. Our part was a little bit different than the part of those credit card companies, those banks, those law enforcement people, and the legislators who have to now figure out how to actually activate the code. Our job was to ensure that there was a code, that we have the capability, if the other players in this agree, to get it done. So that's
I mean,
our role.
it's very, in both cases, two very tangible things to do, right, and still to do. Ramon, with the remaining time, what would you tell some of the other brand leaders in this room, brand leaders on the virtual broadcast, to what are the things that they can do? And particularly because you are both in industries that are highly regulated and often, difficult to transact in. But,
Sure.
what would you?
By the way, it's such an important question because I do think this is this begins the process of showing up, and I do think brands need to reflect on a couple things. One, language is being weaponized right now, so it is too easy to fall into the trap of trying to defend language and getting into an argument. So how do you do a little bit of a judo move and create common language and new ways of talking that are inclusive, right? Bringing other parts of society together. You'll see that in the Ed Council work, actually. It is exactly the conversations that we need to have. What Secretary Duncan and Governor Christie were talking about, there was an agreement that we need to bend the curve, and then that hopefully will lend license to bend the curve on this particular category. I think that exists in so many other categories, right? So this has become divisive conversations, and how do you flip that to inclusive conversations? And I'm excited about that as a marketer. Like, how do we use our skills to communicate and invite others along? I know the left and the right all love their children. How do you tap into that emotion and move this out of the rational, let me defend my side, to the outrage of we have to be in a different place? I think that is a great formula for us to move forward.
It's a great message to end on.
Great.
Thank you both for your time, insights, and for the amazing work you're doing on this issue. And thank you all for your attention. Thanks.
Thank you, Will.